Hello, friends of the forest. I'm really happy to speak about the possibilities in the forests. I'm really happy that we have so many people listening, and I'm really happy to present the Woodland Key Habitats of Estonia. And the introduction was given by Erik Moora. Thank you for this great introduction. And speaking about protecting the values of old forests, this has been a subject for keen discussions and argumentation. We have come to a situation today where the key habitats are known on state-owned lands, and they are also protected on state-owned lands. So this is a small milestone when it comes to the path of protecting the values. But I'm going to tell you briefly about the history and results of woodland key habitats. The Estonian Naturalists Society has been working on this issue for the past few years. What is a key habitat of woodlands? It is natural or primeval forests or primary forests that has endangered and rare species. They are mostly the oldest forests with the smallest human impact, and in accordance with the biodiversity strategy of the EU, all these types of forests have to be taken under protection. In state-owned lands, these lands have to be protected within 2 years already. This is an EU goal. The process started already decades ago in Estonia, and in some steps were already taken about 100 years ago, but the real process has been going on about 30 years. The definition of woodland key habitats came from Sweden, and it was taken over by Estonia at the turn of the century. So the Swedish ecologists introduced this practice in all countries surrounding the Baltic Sea, including Estonia and the Baltic states. So this practice now is spread in at least 10 countries, all countries around the Baltic Sea. And they are known and described on the basis of the structure of the forest and the species. And I can show you a few examples here on the photos. These are well noticeable and these have been picked by experts, and they can be easily found. You can see that they are all very nice, and you strike the eye immediately. There are hundreds of indicators, but practically in Estonia you can find about 100-150 species. So this is what a woodland key habitat looks like. It's a fertile home forest. There's old trees, old timbers that a human hand has not touched for decades or even hundreds of years. It has a specific structure. That means that there are stumps, old trees that have fallen over. It's a varied structure. These are the indicators that are being looked after, and these are also the basis on which these species live on. And there are different species that can live in these places. And this is why we have woodland key habitats, to protect these species, because they are not found in young forests or planted forests, or they are very few. This is an example of deciduous or broad-leaved forests. They have a very varied biodiversity. They are not found in Estonia, just a few in Estonia, but the total area is very small. This is an example of another fertile type of forest. There are also quite wet forests in Estonia. Estonia is a flat land And historically, we've had a lot of water, and undrained forests are also a hidden treasure in Estonia. Here's an example about this. Given that we have a lot of drained forest land in Estonia, then the value of such forests is just going up in time. They have a specific biological diversity here, and because of the because of the water, they have not been managed a lot. Then there are also very dry forests, mostly on the coastline, but also elsewhere. They have a very low succession rate, so it takes a long time for the forest to develop here, and the old pine trees could be easily 500 years old, and they have a specific population of species in these forests. But there are very different types of forests in Estonia, about 30 of them, and they also have regional differences. For example, those on the coastline, and one of the results for us who are dealing with the woodland key habitats on a daily basis, then the biodiversity is underestimated so much. Even we ourselves, before we went in depth into this, we didn't believe the number of species in primary forests in Estonia. There are only maybe 100 or a couple of thousand hectares in Estonia of such forests. And it is unbelievable what the populations we can find there that you cannot see in any other forest in Estonia. So there is something to protect in Estonia. Then inventory of key habitats. The first inventory was conducted at the turn of the century. 19,000 hectares were mapped then. And also back then, only about 42% of the key habitats were found for different reasons, which means that there were about 50,000 hectares of such lands in Estonia. All the rest were commercial forests, or also forests of protected areas. And some of the key habitats have disappeared, especially because of cutting, and the analysis conducted on at around the 2010 shows that about 5,700 hectares of state-owned forests were cut of the unregistered woodland key habitats. This is really a huge area. Roughly half of the Muhu island, or the whole island of Vormsi. And starting from 2010, the cutting rate increased, and it became even more important to map the existing woodland key habitats. But the State Forest Management Center did not start with this initiative. But Estonian Civic Society took the initiative, and also our Estonian Naturalists Society started an inventory of the key habitats. We've been operating for 4 years. During the 4 years, we went through a lot of the state-owned lands, and 1/3 were areas where they had indications of key habitats, but 14% of these areas were already clear-cut, so the value was lost already. So the result was 13,000 hectares of new woodland key habitats, and the average area of one piece was a little bit more than 3.3 hectares. It were just small stands of forest between, or compartments between or stuck between younger forests. But the larger ones were even as big as 80 hectares. And some of them are 45% of them are located in protected areas and 55% in commercial forests. And the results from the State Forest Center show that they have described also more than 9,000 hectares of new woodland key habitats. So the areas for which we conducted the inventory do not coincide. The register at present includes about 40,000 hectares, making up 1.7% of forest lands. Well, there's some work still to be done. According to my estimation, about 5 to 10% of the key habitats have not been described in state-owned lands. So there's some work still to do. And the State Forest Center is about to finish their work as well. So we are getting close to the end already of creating the inventory. And when we look at this map, then we can see the new areas are green, or rather red, and the green ones are in the register. You can see that the forest in southern Estonia, we can see more forest lands, including that have key habitats, and there are certain places elsewhere as well. So that's quite a lot that has been added. So at the turn of the century, there were 50,000 hectares of registered woodland key habitats. So most of the inventory in most of the details have been registered. In private forests, the inventory has not been conducted yet. And here's also some links where you can have more information. So I warmly recommend to visit those sites as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Renno. And we now hand the microphone to Jānis Ķuze to handle the same kind of a topic in Jānis. But I would ask Jānis to comment Renno's presentation or the situation in Estonia.
And first, as we agreed, we'll comment maybe on Renno's talk.
So first, thanks for the great opportunity to be here, and commenting on the Renno's presentation about the woodland key habitats. We have been involved into this process already since late 90s, starting from initiative from Sweden. So there was first some education of potential inventories done, and then in late 90s, the first inventories were started in state-owned forest. So since those times, we have several waves of those inventories, but they, let's say, in a kind culminated in a statewide inventory of habitats of EU importance. And these are not only forest habitats, including woodland key habitats, but as well habitats in bogs, grasslands, in water bodies, and so on. And this inventory has been just completed. It was a really huge work to be done, and there were people actually from several countries involved in dealing with this. And now we know that roughly 10% of all of the forests in Latvia are up to the criteria of habitats of EU importance. So just to be clear, for those who are not familiar with these concepts, not all of the habitats of EU importance are woodland key habitats. Yeah? But there are some habitats of EU importance who are definitely woodland key habitats, like boreal forests, broadleaf forests, and so on. And so we know that a bit more than 1/3 of those habitats is located within Natura 2000 sites, and that really is something to think about. That means that the majority of those really valuable forests are outside of Natura 2000 sites. That's similar as with dispersively breeding bird species. We can't protect them only by protecting of Natura 2000 sites. And we know that a bit less than 1/3 of those habitats are really strictly protected. And that is something we are really worrying about. And we are still waiting for the answers from our responsible ministry what are we going to do with those results of this inventory now. So we really hope that these mapped habitats will be protected, and probably there will be other nature values included into this future network of protected forest areas in Latvia. That's a comment about the situation with the woodland key habitats and protected forest habitats in Latvia. But I would like to go to my presentation. That is a bit a different example because it is dealing with one species, and it was and the information we gathered was got in frames of one life nature project. It was started in 2016 and ended in 2021. There's several partners, and the project context is that there's only one bird species in Latvia we can really say that we are very much responsible for, because a large part of the global population breeds in Latvia. That's a lesser spotted eagle. We have roughly 1/3 of the EU population and roughly 20% of global population breeding in Latvia. And since the beginning of the century, our population has declined a bit, then it recovered, and now it is a bit fluctuating. And we know that the main threats are related to the loss of breeding grounds due to the forestry. There is some problem of disturbance during the breeding season as well, and the problem of lack of proper management in feeding grounds, because this is a bird that breeds in the forest but feeds into the farming landscape, different grasslands. So mostly these are voles, amphibians, insects, and so on. And so the recent population estimate is roughly the same as 10 years ago. It is close to 4,000 pairs, and from those only 6% are breeding within Natura 2000 sites. So this is the same story that I was talking before. So there are some nature values we can't protect only by protecting Natura 2000 areas. And then some 7% were protected before the project was started by microreserves. And microreserves are small protected areas that are established for wide set of subjects. Let's say these might be species, these might be some good examples of habitats. And another, a bit more than 3% were protected by our state forest company by their own means. And so what we have done during these years, we have done a very large-scale inventory of breeding sites, and we have found altogether 543 nests of lesser spotted eagle in Latvia, and additionally close to 2,000 nests of various other species or nests of unknown ownership. So, and this is what we have faced in some part of the cases when these nests were found. So we started to work very intensively on preparing of proposals for protecting of those sites. So these were microreserve proposals. 526 were submitted to the responsible state institutions. And from those, 470 are approved at the moment. So the total area of more or less strictly protected forest that is coming out from this project is 3,290 hectares. I'm not going too much into detail, but there were some more microreserves that we've prepared together with our state forest company. And altogether, that makes these 3,400 hectares of forests protected. Then 48 were rejected by State Forest Service, and in those cases, in 3 of those cases, we initiated court cases because we really thought that the law is not interpreted in the way it should have been. And so when the project was over, there were altogether 754 microreserves designated for lesser spotted eagle. So that means that majority of these protected areas in force now, they were created during this project. So you can see these comparison maps before and after. And so the total number of micro-reserves in Latvia was 3,010 with total area of 47,677 hectares. But these are various species and various habitats, lesser spotted eagle among them. So we can see that these protected areas designated for lesser spotted eagle comprise 25% of all of those protected territories. Talking about the forest, and this is just a kind of side effect of this project. If you are looking at those areas that are protected because of the lesser spotted eagle, we can see that in 678 hectares, these areas are overlapping with habitats of EU importance, and what is not a surprise, majority is this habitat 9050 or Fenno-Scandinavian herbage forests with Picea abies. And that it can be explained in a way by the fact that around half of all of the nests are located in a spruce tree. So this is a bird that really prefers spruce as a breeding tree. So we have found that in every single field season since the beginning of the project, 10% of all of the found nests had some inappropriate activities at them. So that included forests cut at the wrong season, so that means disturbance during the breeding season, nest trees prepared for the logging. And this picture in the background is a very good example. This red dot means that this tree is going to be cut down, and that is a nest tree. So the main problem behind that was that there is a lack of proper process of evaluation of forest biodiversity values prior to the forestry activities. So that means that our forest owners, they need to prepare some forest inventory, and that is a kind of inventory of forest economical values. And then they are going to the forestry, getting a cutting permit and doing in forest what they are allowed, but nobody is asking them to do the full-scale inventory of the forest nature values. So that means that you can have forest with, let's say, a nest of black stork or lesser spotted eagle, and if, let's say, it is not officially known, and if you have some, let's say, low standards towards the nature protection, you can cut such places down. And unfortunately, we almost every year found out that such situations are really happening. And so, since this project has been completed, we have won all 3 court cases. Latvian Fund for Nature has done it. And we have exchanged letters with responsible ministries, informing them about these loopholes in legislation that allow these breeding sites to be destroyed. But unfortunately, both of them responded formally. We have initiated discussion into the how the compensation should be paid to the private forests, because lesser spotted eagle is a bird that you can't protect if you are not, how to say, in some way hampering the interests of private owners, because majority of nests are located into the private forests. And that is an interesting background. They are breeding, 90% of nests are located up to 400 meters from the edge of the forests. And these edges of the forest, small forest patches, they are mostly private owned in Latvia. Well, the large forest tracts are mostly state owned, and that's why that's interesting that there's really a matter who is the owner of the forest. This is one of those cases when one bird species is really very much dependent on the private forests. And so we initiated this discussion on how these compensations should be developed and paid better to make these private owners happy. And our state forest service has changed the attitude towards this designation of micro-reserves, and that was one of the outcomes of the court cases. And still there's no good development in this problem that is related to the inventory or evaluation of forest biodiversity values before the forest cutting. And so we found a last resort to be only approaching to the European Commission, and in spring 2021 we have submitted complaint to the European Commission about Latvia's in compliance with bird directive. And just recently we have got a response from European Commission as well, and the response is that the general idea is that they think that lesser spotted eagle is a species of least concern if we are talking about the protection, and so we have won the court cases, so actually there's nothing to worry about. And so somehow they didn't notice this problem that while we are winning one court case, there are 50 nests being cut down at the same time. So we are really very unhappy with this response, and at the moment we are thinking how to proceed it. Yes, that's it about the lesser spotted eagles and the general overview on the problematics behind the protection of this and other forest birds.
Yes, thank you, Jānis. Maybe you come and sit with us, and before we have a brief time for some questions, I wanted to ask Renno, do you have any comments on Jānis?
Yeah, just shortly, eagle conservation as a conservation measure is one of the oldest species protection actions in Baltic states. In Estonia, all eagle species, together with black stork, eagle owl, and few more, are strictly protected. So rare flagship species are all preserved. We have slightly different legislation. We have automatic micro-reserves, which are implemented after the finding of new nest site. In Latvia, you have to make these legal proceedings to implement it. So this is the main difference. But in general, the attitude targets are the same, also in Lithuania.
But the questions about this private ownership and the fair compensation, is this similar in here in Estonia as in Latvia?
In general, it's quite similar. Spotted eagles are also in Estonia mostly breeding on private-owned lands, and all these restrictions are compensated in different schemes. On Natura 2000 sites, we have compensation also outside of it last few years. So there are discussions about the compensation amount. The sum is too small for landowners, but this is one thing which should be changed slightly in near future. So we'll see.
So, are there any questions or või on meil internetist?
Ei ole.
Ei ole. Okay, I see questions. Yes. Question about cooperation with private owners, forest owners.
Yeah, the main cooperation is done actually on state level. So state authorities are working daily basis different problematic things considering private owners. I mean, if private owners have some problems about conservation, then of course many questions will come until the specialist of some species, for example. So, but this daily base, how to preserve, why to preserve, how to conserve some species, such kind of cooperation is, unfortunately not happening.
What about Latvia? What is your experience with cooperating with private owners?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. It is in somehow related to the question about compensations that we have discussed before. And I can sketch very shortly that in Latvia, currently we have a yearly payment-based compensation scheme. So that means that if there's a protected area established on your property, then you are paid some amount of money per hectare per year. And in a lengthy healthy period, it pays out the value of the forest, but we are really talking about the long periods, but the problems are rising in cases when, let's say, there's already harvester warmed up at the edge of the forest, and then you suddenly find a nest of black stork, and then you are going to the private forest owner and you are saying that you are offering, let's say, 160 euros per hectare per year, and of course this is something that can't be compared with the income that can be get out of the forest when the forest is cut at once. And so that's why we are offering these proposing changes into this compensation system, and we think that there should be one option of one-off payment when the owner is paid all of the market value of the forest at once. But of course this scheme is much more expensive, and it is considered at the moment by our responsible ministry, but still there are no, let's say, good development in this direction. And this compensation scheme, it really in many cases makes cooperation with private forest owners very problematic, because they think that they are treated unfairly and they are not compensated fairly, and if there is this lack of trust from both sides, then this communication is not, let's say, very productive in many cases.
That's really important nuance. Would like to talk about more, but I saw questions there. Peeter vist oli kõigepealt seal.
Tervist, Peeter Laurits, Biotoopia. Selline küsimus Eesti seadusandluse kohta, kui inimene leiab metsast ühe või mitu tunnusliiki ja see piirkond ei ole kaitse alla võetud, kui inimene soovib samme selleks astuda, millised oleksid protseduurireeglid?
The question was about the legislation that if somebody
protsess on tegelikult hästi lihtne, veppide kaitse. Oh, sorry, I will speak in English. Okay. Woodland Key Habitats legal protection is described in legal note signed by Minister of Environment, and there are very precise description how this process is going. But if you find on your own or neighbor or some forest some good indicator species or good populations, then the expert can check it. Experts are working also in the environmental board, Keskkonnaametis, and the environmental board is actually making a quality control also for our work, and have been approved about 95% of our woodland key habitats. The other 5% are lower value on their opinion. And there are also non-governmental woodland key habitat experts and also working in forestry sector. So the list of experts are in the webpage of Ministry of Environment.
So I saw, yeah.
Yes, Kaarel Võandu from Estonian Naturalists Society. I have a question for Jānis. First, congratulations on the impressive number of lesser spotted eagles, 4,000 pairs. I think Estonian number, and Renno can correct me if I'm wrong, is about 500, so eight times less. And I have a question about the management restrictions. There were micro reserves and then there were the buffer zones. What kind of management restrictions you have in them?
Yes, so first about the micro-reserves. Generally, in the absolute majority of cases, micro-reserves means hands-off territory. So that means strict nature protection. Lesser spotted eagle is the only exception. In these micro-reserves that are established for this species, forest owners are allowed to extract some small amount of fallen trees, wind-fallen trees every year, and that was introduced with the view to allow locals in the countryside to get some firewood. And for many landowners, this is actually one of the, let's say, biggest concern if we are talking about the restrictions in the forest. They are asking where I will get the firewood. So the lesser spotted eagle is only exception. But in the buffer zones, and buffer zones are usually much larger than the micro bike reserves. In our legislation, the bike reserve for lesser spotted eagle can be up to 30 hectares, and altogether with buffer zone up to 100 hectares. And in buffer zones, only seasonal restrictions apply. So that means that you can do whatever you are allowed to do in your forest, but only outside of the breeding season. And these periods, they depend on the species. For like white-tailed eagle, golden eagle, these periods are much longer just because these are birds that are present on their breeding territory all year round, while for the migrants like black-stork, osprey, lesser spotted eagle, this period is shorter, and it's in a kind overlaps with a period when the eagles arrive from the Africa and then before they are leaving the breeding area for the wintering grounds.
Yes, we have time for short last question because we run out of time. So.
Very shortly about a question for Renno. In Estonia, what happens if, for example, what is not yet registered is cut down in state land? Is there anything happening in that situation?
Actually, not really. If we have described and sent data to authorities, then the cutting plans are stopped, and this is actually working in state-owned lands, at least so far. But all unregistered, unknown, not described woodland key habitats are more or less like common commercial forest, actually. State Forest Enterprise are checking some part of their old forests, but not all, I presume. So some of the values are disappearing actually today, now also. And we haven't reached the goal to preserve all old growth and primary forest in Estonia, because woodland key habitats doesn't cover them all, and conservation areas doesn't cover at all also. So there must be done more effort outside of protected areas to cover the old growth valuable forest.
So thank you, Jānis and Renno, and if you have more questions, just grab in the lunch pause and ask.